The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease, and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. We can well perceive how the whole human race is encompassed with incalculable afflictions. We see it languishing on its bed of sickness, sore tried and disillusioned. They that are intoxicated by self-conceit have interposed themselves between it and the divine and infallible physician. Witness how they have entangled all men, themselves included, in the mesh of their devices. They can neither discover the cause of the disease, nor have they any knowledge of the remedy. They have conceived the straight to be crooked, and have imagined their friend and enemy. Incline your ears to the sweet melody of this prisoner. Arise and lift your voices, that haply they that are fast asleep may be awakened. Say, O ye who are as dead, the hand of divine bounty preferreth unto you the water of life. Hasten and drink your fill. Whoso hath been reborn in this day shall never die. Whoso remaineth dead shall never live. Baha'u'llah.
We are going to encounter the question of the Baha'i Faith and Islam, similarities and differences in the course of this presentation. But I think in order to set the balance properly, we must from the very beginning point out that the Baha'i Faith esteems very highly Islam. And so what we're going to be talking about here also is the significance of Islam in the history of civilization, in the life of the world, and the well-being of humanity. And this is, we're presenting a Baha'i perspective, not the Baha'i perspective, God forbid. This is just Todd Lawson speaking as a Baha'i, and this is a perspective, may be shared by many Baha'is, but that might also be discussed. So let us proceed. Also, I'm very happy that beautiful film was shown, because this is, in fact, the anniversary, the 202nd anniversary of the birth of Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, known to history as the Bab, and by many other titles, as was mentioned in the film. One of the most significant is the primal point, from whom all things generate. But in context of our discussion today, the primal point also indicates a new beginning in history, a new beginning for humanity, from the point of view of the Baha'i teachings and the writings of the Bab. The word Bab means door or gate. And this is a very significant title, as we will, I hope, be able to speak about as time goes on here today. The Bahai Perspective. This is the name of the series, Bahai Perspective, and this is a very interesting way of looking at the Baha'i teachings as a perspective, as one way of looking at the world amongst many possible ways of looking at the world. Baha'i perspective from the beginning that we are using today to look at Islam is precisely the oneness of God, the oneness of truth or religion, and the oneness of humanity. We will discover in what follows that this perspective is shared in every detail by the Islamic religion. Islam preaches the oneness of God, the oneness of truth or revelation or religion, and the oneness of humanity. There's a fourth oneness that is usually not mentioned in this delineation of the Baha'i perspective, and that is the oneness of time and history. From the point of view of this perspective, what you might wish to call it a philosophical or a spiritual perspective, time really does not exist. As Abdul Baha has said in the selections from the writings of Abdul Baha, in the sight of God, the past, the present, and the future are all one and the same. Whereas relative to man, the past is gone. and forgotten. The present is fleeting and the future is within the realm of hope or the future. We can return to this quotation toward the end to try and understand exactly the implications for this particular topic. But to begin with, bearing in mind the title of the Bab as the Bab, the gate or the door, Bab in Arabic, it is important to remember that Baha'is feel that he was the Bab to a future revelation, but Bahai perspective also insists that we see the Bab as a door to what came before. As was indicated in the film, the Bab was executed by staunch enemies in 1850 because accusations of being a heretic or preaching against Islam or preaching faulty Islam. But anyone who studies the life of the Bab in very short order realizes that when they killed the Bab, they possibly killed a person who expressed and lived and embodied a love for Islam unparalleled in the history of the world. He loved the Prophet, he loved the Qur'an, he loved the Imams. He was alive and electric with this love for Islam. So it is his love and his appreciation and understanding that provides us today with a door not only to the future, but a door to what the uninitiated refer to as the past. Abdul Baha says doesn't really exist. In other words, we are living surrounded by the past all the time. This is with us, and he helps us understand this and acquire a useful, spiritual, and truthful perspective on the role of Islam in the world. Very briefly, and this is taken from the great historian Marshall Hodgson, we want to see how Islam functions in the greater history, world history, from the point of view of both of science, and as it happens, this seems to harmonize very much with not only Islamic teaching, but with Baha'i teaching. And we'll just go through this very, very quickly. There's, beginning with settled communities around 10,000 BCE, we see that early farming communities develop and the cities develop in 3000 BC city-states. Then there's something called a pre-axial age. Don't worry about that. What we're looking at here is something called the axial age, which we'll just say a few words about to try and get a feeling for the role of Islam in history. And the post-axial age, which represents the time that Islam was born. Islam, to begin with, suggests that there has been no community in the history of the world. It doesn't suggest it, it states it very clearly. There's been no community in the history of the world that has not had a prophet and a message from God. Muslim scholars have set the total number of prophets at 124,000, even though only 25 are mentioned in the Quran. This means that all of this prehistory of Islam was populated by communities, human communities, which had revelations from God. This is something that dovetails perfectly with Baha'i teaching as well, that there have always been prophets and messengers to teach human beings how to live in a specific time and place. This axial age is important because it represents a time when over a broad expanse of earth that certain ideas seem to bubble up sort of spontaneously together in China, in Iran, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and even in Rome. There's a certain change. And this change is characterized by two major things that we won't go on about this at great length, but two things. That is, the idea of the individual becomes very, very important during the axial age. Whereas formerly it was community or royalty that was the center of society, during the axial age, through the prophets of the Hebrew Bible and the teachings of Zoroaster and on, it became clear that individual actions and decisions also had permanent effects, eternal effects. People determined the fate of their souls by their decisions and their choices. This is something quite new. That just a common or garden individual bricklayer or weaver, someone who's not the royal house, actually has cosmic significance. All right, so that's one thing. The individual becomes important. The other thing is that during the axial age, 800 BC to 200 BC, literacy begins to cease to be the monopoly of a priestly class and is spread through trade primarily throughout the world, so that it becomes possible to conceive of a kind of universal literacy, even though it doesn't really happen for a long time, still hasn't happened. But the idea is that you no longer need a priesthood to read the religious texts to you. You as the individual can now read them yourself. Islam grew up after the effects of this axial age. It's the first major religion to come into the world after this axial age. So it relies upon these historical changes and speaks to them in a new voice. And this is one of the things that allows Islam to speak about the oneness of humanity and the oneness of religion and the oneness of God. Now, to look at the Baha'i writings, we're going to go through these rather quickly. And forgive me if I go too fast. If you have questions, as Bayan mentioned, please note them and we can discuss them at the end. I can't promise answers, but we can at least discuss them. All right. So the Baha'i writings are full of references and appreciations and celebrations and praise of Islam. Here is one characteristic one from Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, whose holy day is celebrated beginning tomorrow, which begins tonight. Blessing and peace be upon him, Muhammad, through whose advent Batha Mecca is wreathed in smiles, and the sweet savors of whose raiment have shed fragrance upon all mankind. He who came to protect men from that which would harm them in the world below. Exalted, immensely exalted is his station above the glorification of all beings and sanctified from the praise of the entire creation. Through his advent, the tabernacle of stability and order was raised throughout the world, and the ensign of knowledge hoisted among the nations. May blessings rest also upon his kindred and his companions, through whom the standard of the unity of God and his singleness was uplifted, and the banners of celestial triumph were unfurled. Through them, the religion of God was firmly established among his creatures, and his name magnified amidst his servants. This is one of the many things that Baha'u'llah has to say about the founder of Islam, Muhammad. And from the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, Shoghi Effendi, we have the following. There is so much misunderstanding about Islam in the West, in general, that you have to dispel. Your task is difficult and requires a good deal of erudition. Your chief task is to acquaint the friends with the pure teaching of the Prophet Muhammad as recorded in the Quran, and then to point out how these teachings have, throughout succeeding ages, influenced, nay, guided the course of human development. In other words, you have to show the position and significance of Islam in the history of civilization. This is a cardinal belief of Baha'is. Baha'is have the duty to explain the beautiful contribution of Islam to the world. To study Islam, says Marja Gale, a very important Baha'i scholar and author who's given us many, many translations and books and so on. To study Islam, we need new books. We need a re-evaluation by future Baha'i scholars of all the available data in the light of Baha'u'llah's teachings. The Guardian told a pilgrim that the Baha'is must vindicate Islam in the West. the Baha'is must vindicate Islam in the West. We must convert people, not to its institutions, now abrogated by the Bab and Baha'u'llah, but to its truth as a further step in divine revelation, following Christianity. We can appreciate our own faith better if we are familiar with Islam. The Guardian refers to Islam as the source and background of our faith. And here we had that quotation from which that snippet was taken. The Baha'is must strive to obtain from sources that are authoritative and unbiased. This is from the Guardian Shoghi Effendi again, in Advent of Divine Justice, which was a major letter and now a book that Baha'is study in deepenings all over the world. And it's interesting to note that it was written, completed on Christmas Day in 1938. So that's something of a long time ago. This is what the Guardian was saying about Islam in 1938. The Baha'is must strive to obtain from sources that are authoritative and unbiased sound knowledge of the history and tenets of Islam, the source and background of their faith. The source and background of their faith. And approach reverently and with a mind purged from preconceived ideas the study of the Qur'an, which, apart from the sacred scriptures of the Babi and Baha'i revelations, constitutes the only book which can be regarded as an absolutely authenticated repository of the Word of God. They must devote special attention to the investigation of those institutions and circumstances that are directly connected with the origin and birth of their faith, with the station claimed by its forerunner, the Bab, and with the laws revealed by its author, Baha'u'llah. It is interesting when you go back to see the context of this quotation to learn that this portion was written by the Guardian in connection with a teaching program that was being planned by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Canada and the United States in 1938. So he is saying that in order for the teaching program to be effective, the Baha'is must prepare by studying Islam. Okay? The revelation of which Baha'u'llah is the source and center abrogates none of the religions that have preceded it. This is from the Guardian. Nor does it attempt in the slightest degree to distort their features or to belittle their value. It disclaims any intention of dwarfing any of the prophets. You're all familiar with this quotation, and because of time, I won't carry on reading this, but I wanted you to think about this first sentence. The revelation, which Baha'u'llah is the source and center, abrogates none of the religions that have preceded it. And this is the rest of the quotation, in which the Guardian voices this very famous statement of his. Religious truth is not absolute, but relative. Divine revelation is progressive and not final. Excuse me, okay. Here we are. So now, we're saying that the Baha'i faith, in some ways, teaches a more expanded version of the Islamic religion, in as much as Islam had, from the 7th century forward, taught about the oneness of humanity and the oneness of God and the oneness of religion. And in order to illustrate one of the ways in which Islam has taught this, now we'll go to this famous teaching of the covenant that Islam is uniquely responsible for. Nothing like it seems to have existed in religions prior. And it's something that has definitely provided a foundation for the Baha'i vision of society. And that is the famous verse of the covenant in the Quran at Surah 7, 172. Like where it is revealed to all humanity through the voice of the Prophet Muhammad, and is now this verse in the Quran, that all human beings are essentially united. And this is a scenario that, according to Islamic scholars, occurs in a time beyond time and in a place beyond place, but which is nonetheless absolutely real. And here's the Arabic, but with this particular English translation, I will read to you. Recall when thy sustainer, thy Lord, Rabb, brought forth from their offspring, from the loins of the children of Adam. He thus called upon them to bear witness about themselves. And he said, am I not your sustainer? To which they answered, yea, indeed, we do bear witness thereto. Of this we remind you, lest you say on the day of resurrection, verily we were unaware of this. Or lest you say, verily it was but our forefathers who in times gone by began to ascribe divinity to other beings beside God. And we were but their late offspring. Wilt thou then destroy us for the doings of those inventors of falsehoods? So this is a non-negotiable teaching of the Quran, that everyone is equal, that all human beings, regardless of race, creed, color, or anything else you might imagine, gender, are unified in this spiritual realm in their relationship to God, and that there is no difference amongst any of them. This is a very radical teaching at this time, because one of the other things that characterizes the post-axial age in Muhammad's region, which is broadly speaking from the Nile River to the Oxus River in central Babylonian and Iranian regions and Arabia, the Eastern Mediterranean, is that it's populated by unbelievably cantankerous, contentious religious groups. So the Jews, the Christians, the Zoroastrians, and the various sects of these major religions are all vying for some kind of authority, identity, and cultural space. And for this to have been revealed by Muhammad in sometime before 632, in the most remote place on the planet, must have struck many ears as miraculous and completely at odds with their lived experience. Because the prophet here from God is saying that you see all of these differences amongst you. In reality, they are an illusion. We are all one humanity. And the story of this oneness goes back to a time before time and place. And it is one of the most emphatic teachings of the Quran. Okay? So, and you see this covenant repeated in the Baha'i writings. One of the most obvious ones is in Hidden Words, Persian 19. Oh, my friends, have you forgotten that true and radiant morn? That's the day of the covenant. When in those hallowed precincts and blessed surroundings, you were all gathered in my presence, beneath the shade of the tree of life, which is planted in the all-glorious paradise. Awestruck, you listened as I gave utterance to these three most holy words. This is precisely the same scenario that the Quran speaks about, the unity of humanity, and a unity that is in peace and in concerted worship of the loving God of all beings. There's another passage in the Hidden Words. O my friends, call ye to mind that covenant ye have entered into with me upon Mount Paran, situate within the hallowed precincts of Zaman. I have taken to witness the concourse on high and the dwellers in the city of eternity. Yet now none do I find faithful unto the covenant. Of a certainty, pride and rebellion have effaced it from the hearts, in such wise that no trace thereof remaineth. Yet knowing this, I awaited and disclosed it not. Well, let's ignore the somewhat troubling aspect of you've all broken the covenant and go back to the reality of the covenant. This depends absolutely on that Quranic phrase, 7:172, which posits this pre-eternal covenant. And as a footnote, it has been established, I think, by the research of Brent Poirier, that the Guardian has said that this breaking of the covenant is not something that was directed to the Baha'i Friends, but to enemies of the faith. For those of you who are interested, you can follow it up or write Brent an email and ask him for the details. But this is all about the importance of the covenant, and this covenant comes from no place else but Islam, the Quran, and the teachings of the Prophet, and the Islamic culture that evolved from it, because the covenant became a huge theme amongst poets and historians. It represented the beginning of life, the beginning of consciousness, the beginning of history for the entire human race. And here are some passages from Abdul Baha on the covenant and time. But I think we're running short of time, and I want to proceed to some of these aspects about Islam that this is supposed to be about. Revelation in the Quran, and this teaching of the covenant is a revelation, a divine revelation of the Word of God. It is a Quranic event. In some ways, it's possible to say that revelation is the main topic of the Quran. The Quran asserts that revelation has always occurred, and that it will always occur, and that it occurs in many different ways, not just through words, but through creation, the signs of the physical universe, and in the souls of humanity, and in the emotions and feelings of human beings. Revelation is an ongoing thing. And that if all of the trees were pens and all of the seas were ink, there would not be enough to record the revelation of God. So this is something that is a very important Quranic teaching. Revelation is a permanent feature of the cosmos. The cosmos is, in fact, a revelation of God. So this is an important teaching. Revelation is from the one unknowable God to humanity through divine messengers. That is indeed a teaching of the Prophet Muhammad. Revelation has occurred in all communities through history. Each community has had a divine messenger. The Quran mentions only 25 of these, but as I mentioned earlier, Islamic scholars put the number at 124,000 in order to account for the vastness of human community in the history that they were familiar with. Human variation is also another mode of revelation. And among his wonders is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the diversity of your tongues and colors. For in this, behold, there are messages indeed for all who are possessed of knowledge. So this difference is a source of knowledge and inspiration, according to the Quran. Human variety is created by God. And had thy sustainer so willed, he could surely have made all mankind one single community. But he willed otherwise, and so they are different, right? God could have made everyone exactly the same, but did not. Why did he not do this? Human variation is a source of knowledge. This is the primary reason. O mankind, behold, we have created you all out of a male and female, and have made you into nations and tribes for one reason only. We've made you different for one reason, so that you might come to know one another. This is a very modern idea. When you speak about the Baha'i Faith and Modern Perspectives, this modern perspective is as old as the Quran, in a sense. Verily, the noblest of you in the sight of God is the one who is most deeply conscious of him. Behold, God is all-knowing and all-aware. You see the blue part here on the slide is the translation of this very concise, brief Arabic word, which is li ta'arafu. And this verb, which is translated as so that you might come to know one another, is actually much more rich and complex than this translation. What it means is that so that you may all share the mutual enhancing experience of recognizing and becoming familiar with each other. This is a long, somewhat loquacious translation, but that is the meaning of that statement in the Arabic. Imagine the difference exists so that we can have the intellectual and spiritual adventure of understanding and discovery. All of this depends upon another Quranic teaching, which is the teaching of the fitra, which is a beautiful Arabic word which is mentioned in the Quran, which indicates the original essence of reality in which human beings were created, which allows for that very interesting and striking scenario on the day of the covenant. In other words, it says that everyone was created in a kind of pure spiritual form, a pure form that is characterized by harmony and love amongst each other in the presence of God. That is what the fitra means. And the later scholar says, quote the hadith from the Prophet that says, every newborn is born in a state of fitra, and babies are pure and have this pure day of the covenant spiritual reality about them, but their parents make them Jews or Christians or Sabians. So this is the teaching from the Prophet about fitra. Fitra, according to a scholar, says that it means that each individual is born in this world with a recognition that God is Lord and the only God. This is a very interesting and, if you like, modernist teaching that the world owes to Islam, frankly. The covenant is considered to be dependent upon this fitra nature of human beings. All humanity has received revelation. Now, every community has had an apostle, and only after their apostle has appeared and delivered his message is judgment passed on them in all equity, and never are they wronged. In other words, justice is always there. Communities are only chastised or destroyed because of their disobedience of the divine will. Never have we sent forth any apostle otherwise than in the language of his own people. This might seem like a common sense position, but it also helps to understand religious history and get an understanding for the way in which the Quran and Islam views the community of religions and the different languages, for example. All languages are, in a sense, holy, therefore, not just one. All languages have had divine revelation filtered through them. So God lets go astray him that wills and guides him that wills. All things are created from the same source. Are then they who are bent on denying the truth not aware that the heavens and the earth were once a single entity, which we then parted asunder, and we made out of water every living thing? So with the Quran, the idea of humanity is expanded beyond the borders that it once was constrained by through that axial age that we discussed earlier. Humanity is no longer determined by linguistic considerations or by racial considerations or tribal considerations or ethnic considerations. All humanity shares, in fact, the same epic history and is on the same epic and spiritual journey from creation to revelation. It brings to mind the beautiful passage from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. Remember, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flames are enfolded into the crown knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. Thank you for your kind attention. I think I should stop here and open it up to some other voices. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Lawson. I loved how comprehensive it was, and I learned a lot of things about Islam that I didn't know before. So thank you so much.
So it's an honor to be a part of your program.
Thank you. So now we can have questions and answers. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and I will read it out loud. So our first question asks, why did Shoghi Effendi in 1938 write specifically to North American Baha'is to study Islam? And why do we need to have this knowledge as Baha'is in North America?
It's a terrific question. I'm still thinking about it. You know, one thing is very interesting is that he issued this order in 1938. So, and I think we'd all be a little sheepish if we measured our progress from now to back then, how seriously we have taken this command from the Guardian. But I think one of the reasons that come is so that Baha'is and in their teaching can speak about Islam with the kind of veneration and love that it deserves, and thereby help to somehow cure this strange phobia and allergy to Islam that seems to exist in our world, and try and demonstrate to the world and teach, along with the teachings of the Baha'i Faith, that Islam has great spiritual resources for humanity, and also to help us all consider this very interesting, it's almost like a Zen koan that the Baha'i Faith gives us. That is to say, everyone acknowledges that the Baha'i Faith was born in an Islamic society, and that there are many Quranic quotations throughout the Baha'i writings. The Bab loved the Quran. He wrote like the Quran. He adored the Prophet Muhammad. It was his grandfather, if you remember, and all of these things. Islam is very much a part of the Baha'i grammar of piety, if you like. Yet, the Baha'i Faith insists that it is not Islam. It insists that it is not even a sect of Islam, that it is a new, distinct religious identity. The only way that we can really get a handle on this distinctiveness is to understand what it's supposed to be distinct from. You know, if we don't have an understanding of what the reality of Islam is, then we run the risk of saying, well, we do this and Islam doesn't do this. But then if you go deeper, you find, behold, Islam has already done this. So we can't really say we're different on that score. So we need to understand what are the differences and the similarities to understand the true, unique identity of what the Baha'i Faith is. I think this might have been also one of the reasons. Thank you for the question. But, you know, this is something that we can think about at all times. And, you know, we need to encourage each other. And every assembly, every LSA, especially in North America, would do well to consider this statement from the Guardian, this suggestion from the Guardian, if you like, which is really a command. You know, when the Guardian suggests something, it's really a command. And, for example, experiment in the community and appoint somebody in the community to be the Islamic research person for that community. Because this is such a crucial issue for the Baha'is, as indicated in this quotation from the Guardian.
Thank you. Our next question asks, could you please explain the day of resurrection?
Well, you know, the Bab and Baha'u'llah have numerous times in their writings said that not only does every word have numerous meanings, the Bab emphasizes that every letter of scripture has an infinite number of meanings. So to give one definition for one word is, in a sense, to do violence to the revelation. Resurrection means so many different things. In one sense, it means the resurrection of humanity at the replay of the covenant that happened in the Bab's Qayyúmu'l-Asmá, the tafsir on the Surah of Joseph. That is one clear meaning. That covenant that we talked about at the beginning of, the day of the covenant in the mysterious time and place, the Bab in the Qayyúmu'l-Asmá says that this covenant is taking place again. And that gives meaning to his title as the primal point, because he's saying that time is starting all over again. And this primordial covenant, when God says, "Am I not your Lord?" is happening again in this text that he wrote for Mullah Hussein. So that's one understanding of the resurrection. But we invite people to, consider all possible meanings of the word resurrection.
Thank you. Our next question asks, do all divine messengers, are they aware of their status, or can they be an unaware, enlightened sage among people in their community?
Well, that's an interesting question. I have never thought about it before, but I think my first answer would be that when they're called to give the revelation, they must have some awareness that they are being, asked to have this special role in society. Excuse me while I have a drink. I don't have much more to say about that one.
Thank you.
Okay.
Our next question asks, could you summarize what it means to know and to worship God in terms of endeavoring to know and serve our fellow humans in society?
Well, that's a beautiful question. Summarize. I mean, to the extent that I know what it means to begin with, this is to know and to worship God is the point of the entire program, is it not? As we say in the noonday prayer every day. I suppose at the most foundational and initial level, from the Baha'i point of view, to know and to worship God is to recognize Baha'u'llah as the messenger of God for this time. This seems to be in harmony with what it says in the Kitab-i Aqdas, for example, that we should know and in order to know God, in Baha'i theology, if you want to use such a word, knowledge of God only comes through knowledge of the teachings and the person of what Baha'is call manifestation of God, or divine manifestation. I almost said manifestation of God. It's not really manifestation of God, it's divine manifestation. It's a slight difference, but a crucial one. Baha'is do not believe in divine incarnation, but Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah as a divine manifestation is the place. Mazhar actually means place where something appears. Place where divinity, to the degree that human beings can recognize and understand it, place where divinity does occur for this time and place. So to know God would be to recognize this. To worship God, worship is another way of saying love, and to acknowledge the greatness of the power of the person that you are in love with. So these are some ideas, but it's not something that gives itself to summary, frankly.
Thank you. Our next question asks, in your own way and perspective, could you kindly succinctly summarize the difference between Islam and the Baha'i Faith, especially the new teachings beyond just new or updated laws and rules? Thank you.
Right. Well, you know, sometimes the differences are a matter of emphasis. It doesn't make them any less different. Sometimes the differences are a matter of category. If we look first at the Bahá'í period, which is my special area of research, the way in which the Bab's message and the Bab's teaching made a absolute, complete break, in a sense, with Islam, and made it clear that whatever was happening was no longer Islamic in the if you like, the juridical sense of the word, was the insistence that this hidden imam that 12 Shi'i Muslims had long been expecting had actually returned. Now, why is this? This is in sort of phenomenological terms, I guess, or social history terms. Up until that time, and still today in Iran and other communities where 12 Shi'ism is the main religion, everything about the religion depends upon the non-appearance of the hidden imam. That is to say, if the hidden imam appears, the institutional structure and in a sense, the mythic or spiritual truth of 12 Shi'ism is no longer there, because it exists for one reason and one reason only: to prepare people and to teach people how to wait for the return of their savior. If the savior does return, then there is no longer 12 Shi'ism. So this is a clear way in which the Baha'i faith has put itself outside the pale of Islam. Then there are, of course, teachings that are very clear. For example, the complete abolition of jihad. This is no longer part of the program from the Baha'i point of view. And the very explicit and non-ambiguous insistence on the equality of men and women. Even though we will see, if we study very carefully, as many very gifted and brilliant scholars of Islam are now showing, and that Islam also does not see any difference between men and women. This truth was obscured through the faulty interpretation of Muslim authorities. But Baha'u'llah has made it absolutely clear that men and women are absolutely equal. So this is a difference by degree rather than kind, in a sense. It makes it unambiguous. And there are many, many other ways in which the Baha'i faith distinguishes itself from Islam, which I promised to talk about, but it seems that I'm unable to keep my promise today because time is so precious.
Our next question asks, what is the Arabic term for covenant, and is it the same that's used in the Baha'i writings?
Yes, there are two words. One is ahad, ain, hey, dal, and the other is mithaq. Both words are used in the Baha'i writings and in Islamic writings to talk about the covenant.
Thank you. Our next question asks, with the coming of Islam, it seems that Europe went into the Dark Ages. Do you see that to be the result of the end of dispensation of Christianity? And would you please elaborate on the effect of Islam on the progress of humanity as it spread?
Well, I'm glad your questions are all easy, and I think the great Bahá'í family offered to help me out in any possible way. So if you could answer this question for me, I would be. There are so many ways in which Islam influenced Europe. It's a beautiful topic. and one that's becoming more and more acknowledged in, professional scholarship all the time. But the Guardian and Abdul Baha and the Bab and Baha'u'llah all knew, had no doubt that this was the case, that the Islamic dispensation shed great spiritual gifts over Europe and inspired developments that would otherwise not have been possible had it not been for the Islamic revelation. Why many of these developments moved away from Islamic lands to find fruit in European lands is also an interesting question, and seem to have become dislocated from an original Islamic setting. In a sense, the whole idea of Europe is as a result of the Islamic moment in history. If you look at the border, the geographic location of Europe on the map, you will see that it actually represents that part of the globe that is not Islamic, you see. So Europe sort of negatively defines itself after the rise of Islam as being that place where Islam is not. And why this was necessary is because Europe was phobic about the spread and greatness and power of Islam. In the 9th century in Baghdad, 9th, 10th, and 11th century, people from all over the world were running to find the newest developments in science and in writing and in paper making and in discovery of the circulatory system and the mapping of the skies and all of these things, while still back in what we call Europe, people were getting a big charge out of scratching their name on a piece of bark. Right? So, so when they came to the Islamic lands, they were overwhelmed with this new way of being human. This whole new way of being human is really what influenced both the construction of Europe and set up this intense rivalry between Islamic lands and Europe that eventually developed into the somewhat, quite unfortunate event of the Crusades. But there are many scientific developments that first saw the light of day at the hands of Islamic scientists, Muslim scientists, methods of philosophy, rescuing, in fact, from oblivion much of Greek philosophy by translating it into Arabic, which was then translated into Latin and preserved for European scholars, Thomas Aquinas and his colleagues, to read Aristotle and others. So it's vast and deep, the Islamic influence on Europe. And it is the Islamic contribution to world knowledge and world history that allowed, in fact, the Renaissance to occur in Europe in the 16th, 17th, 15th centuries. So it's a very real development, and there is no mystery about it. And it's becoming more and more accepted in scholarship by historians throughout the world.
Thank you. Our next question asks, are we obligated to love everyone who passes our path? And what's the relationship of this to God's justice of reward and punishment?
Well, I don't know. This sounds like a question for another specialist, frankly. But the way I read the Baha'i writings is that we are supposed to see the face of God in everyone we meet. This seems to be the rule. And so that I would think that would include loving and esteeming and respecting people that one meets. That's my quick answer. I don't think I'm going to find another one, however.
Our next question asks, is revelation ongoing, or is it at every instance between manifestations?
Is revelation ongoing, or is it at
every instance, at every manifestation?
Well, we believe that the revelation is continuous, that it carries on at all times. We also believe that the revelation that comes through the soul of the prophet, or the manifestation, the divine manifestation, has a special power and is in some ways qualitatively different than other kinds of revelation. But revelation is a condition of the universe. The cosmos is in a constant state of revealing itself to perception.
Thank you. Our next question asks, could you please explain about the term the seal of the prophets, which many Muslims are holding tight to?
And so do Baha'is. How many times does Baha'u'llah refer to Muhammad as the seal of the prophets? I mean, numerous times. And the terminology is very clear. When we think of the terminology, it is also clear why Baha'u'llah uses the terminology that he uses. Instead of referring to the founder of religion as a prophet, he calls them divine manifestation. There's a reason for this, because Muhammad was in fact, last prophet. He was the seal of the prophets. But this doesn't mean that he was the last center of revelation. Right? Prophecy is a special genre of divine communication. And this is, in other words, from the Baha'i point of view, the Qur'an came at a particular time in history to further the progress of humanity to a state that we are all working toward, this unity and harmony on the planet Earth. The Quran plays a crucial and invaluable and essential role in doing this, and will always do that. It will not stop doing that. The Quran has secrets that we as Baha'is and as citizens of the world must penetrate always. We must not think that it's now no longer valid. But revelation also continues, which sheds light on the way in which we read previous revelations. Muslims are called upon, they're the 5 pillars of Islam. They're also the 5 pillars of belief. And those pillars of belief are that all Muslims believe in God, in God's angels, and in all of God's prophets, and all of the holy books. That's every Muslim must believe in all of these things. So in short, this is another way in which the Baha'i teaching is very similar to Islam and differs by degrees, but it will not negotiate away this insistence on the oneness of humanity.
Thank you. Our next question asks, your comments on the Islamic tradition mentioned in the Qur'an, where Baha'u'llah mentioned 1,000 Fatimas I espoused. What is the meaning of this?
Well, that's it's a little technical, and I'm not really prepared to answer this question. If you read the entire quotation to me, perhaps I can it would help me think about it. So the person who asked the question would like to read the entire quotation. But maybe we don't have time for this. If you want to write me an email, by all means do so with the entire quotation, and I'll give you what I think about it.
Thank you. Our next question asks, what is universal revelation, secondary and specific revelation espoused by Baha'u'llah in the Qur'an?
What is universal revelation?
As opposed to secondary and specific revelation.
Well, I think this is along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, that the manifestation, the individual who's chosen, through whom God, and remember, every time Baha'is say the word God, there's sort of a kind of quotation marks around the word, because one of the beliefs of Baha'is is that we can never really know what God is. So it's a continuous sort of situation that we find ourselves in. But the only way we know what God is through God's revelation and through the revelation of the divine manifestation, or what used to be called prophet or messenger. So the primary revelation is the one that comes through because those are the teachings for the time and place that they occur. And this is what is very important, because Baha'is believe in an ever-advancing civilization or community. And time is a reality, even though Abdul Baha, on one hand, says that time, in a sense, does not exist. In a very real sense, it also does exist. So part of being human frequently involves holding on to these two diametrically opposed things and making sense of them for ourselves. And it's out of the tension of those two diametrically opposed things that electricity goes between those two poles, in a sense, and gives rise to what we call life and intelligence and so on.
Thank you. Our next question asks, do you think people like the early disciples of the Bab or Baha'u'llah or Hands of the Cause could have reached any of the stages of the Seven Valley as they commune with God? And can regular folk possibly reach any of these stages in the valleys in their lifetime on Earth?
Well, very interesting question. The Seven Valleys. Baha'u'llah says that it's possible to traverse all of the valleys in the blink of an eye. I mean, and if I think we should take our cue from what Baha'u'llah says, and not pay attention to what Lawson might have to say about this, because that's what he says. That's the way it is. That it is possible for an individual to sojourn through these valleys more quickly or less quickly. But they're definitely a reality. They're a spiritual reality that every human being, as far as I understand, every human being is in the process of going through them. Maybe even sometimes repeating them,
Thank you. Our next question asks, do you think we can conflate Islam and the Baha'i Faith as well as earlier religions?
Well, I need to know what you mean by conflate, I'm sorry to say.
Conflate as in make them equal.
Well, they're equal in the sense that they're both divine revelations. And they're equal in the sense that they both have inexhaustible spiritual resources for the well-being of humanity. They are equal in that they represent answers to the questions of human beings about the things that possess us the most, our fears and our hopes and our dreams. They do this. The language of the Baha'i Faith is certainly from a different time and place than the language of Islam. And that history that represents the space between the beginning of Islam and the beginning of the Baha'i Faith is crucial for the history of the world and for the harmonization of human beings. So yes, they are different, but they're different. They're different. One is not greater than the other, if that's what you want me to say. They are both divine gifts to humanity.
Thank you. Our next question asks, can you tell us about your personal history in the study of Islam, how you have come to study it, how you have studied it, etc.?
Well, thank you. I became a Baha'i in 1968, and by reading the Seven Valleys, as it happened. And, you know, one of the things about the Seven Valleys was that it made a kind of sense that I had never encountered before. And I was much struck by the poetic references to these names that I didn't know before, Rumi and Ali and all of these. So I read it, and I was very inspired by the Seven Valleys, and asked the same kinds of questions that we all do about it. And then the longer I was a Baha'i, the more I kept hearing this, the Baha'i faith is not Islam. It's not a sect of Islam. It's different from Islam. At the same time, my experience of reading the Seven Valleys, and we find out even later that the Seven Valleys is on the model of a poem by Attar that was written in the 12th century. You know, so why are we protesting so much that the Baha'i faith is not Islam? And what are we trying to say here? So this is the question that began to prey on my mind. And I had a plan to become a lawyer, and I took a course in university because it was there, and you had to take a course outside your field. It was called The Heritage of Islam. I thought, well, I'll take this course because maybe this will help me come answer my private question about what is this business about insisting that the Baha'i faith is not Islam. So I took the course and I just fell in love with it. It was like, Keats on first reading Chapman's Homer. I thought there were new planets now in the sky to look at. And so I just forgot about going to law school and began to study Islam, largely because it was so beautiful, but also because it helped me think about this question. There's no doubt that the Baha'i faith is its own unique spiritual and religious identity. But it's also the case that if Islam had not occurred, the Baha'i faith would not exist in the form that we know it today.
Thank you. Is there any literature you would recommend for a person who is searching for a spiritual pathway, specifically their faith at maybe a beginning level? Thank you.
Hidden Words.
We have a question. As at these times, Islam is under attack and we as Baha'is need to have knowledge to defend, how can we explain to people the violence being committed by some followers of Islam?
Just because someone says they're a Muslim doesn't mean that is the case. Think about how the Prophet would see injustice and violence and terror in the world, and then come to your own conclusion. Read the Qur'an for everything that it says about the unity and harmony of humanity, and then judge what's going on in the name of Islam. You see, as Baha'is also have a duty to make this clear to the world. It's crucial. Baha'u'llah was a Muslim. The Bab was a Muslim. Baha'is have something at stake here in trying to make clear what, if you like to use this term, true Islam really is. It stands for justice and peace and unity and prosperity.
Thank you. Another question asks, could you please recommend one book that helps understanding the Quran?
Yes, Michael Sell's book on, and also Carl, I have no mind anymore, excuse me. 1 second. This one is called Carl W. Ernst, How to Read the Quran. It's excellent. Carl Ernst, How to Read the Quran. And then this Approaching the Quran, especially it's about the early surahs of the Quran by Michael Sells. beautiful translations of the Qur'an. But there's another area in which Quranic studies needs to be paid attention to, especially by Baha'is, I think. And that is all of the, I referred to it earlier, there's very exciting, very deep and penetrating work on the gendered situation of the Quran. In other words, this problem of men and women, the equality of men and women. There are some extremely capable scholars these days are producing books on the way women are represented in the Quran, who are also very devout Muslim and are also quite progressive. And so we would do well to look at some of this material too. One of those books is called, the Routledge Handbook on Gender and Islam. It has a series of short, relatively short articles written many times by women experts in Arabic and Islamic jurisprudence and so on. Very eye-opening, extremely hopeful for all of us.
Thank you. Another question asks about the significance of the tablet that is in the shape of a star that's in your background.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's a very compelling and beautiful composition by the Bab, actually. That's in his own handwriting. You can find it online at the British Museum with a beautiful article by Mujan Momin describing it and so on. And we are in the process of posting another article about it on Baha'i Library online. It should be up this week. My colleague and dear friend for many years, Darga Makiki, and I have been working on this for the last year or so. And we've been translating and enumerating and identifying the verses and so forth. This was written by the Bab. We don't know exactly when, in the form of the star. Star, five-pointed star, is the symbol, as the Guardian, Shoghi Effendi says, is really the symbol of the Baha'i revelation, because it represents perfect humanity. I mean, this is my addition. He says that it is this 9 is an important number in the Baha'i faith, but the real number is the 5, as represented by this five-pointed star, because it represents the perfect human being. And the perfect human being for Baha'is is, of course, the divine manifestation, but it is in the process of trying to emulate and obey the divine manifestation that all human beings journey towards perfection. So this is the function of this talisman. The Bab in the Persian Bayan said that all male believers should have a talisman of their own in the shape of the five-pointed star. And all women should have a da'ira, that is to say a circle, sort of a mandala figure that's along the same lines on their own person. So this is part of the Bab's religious teaching.
Thank you. Looks like we have time for just one more question. How do you see the corruption of Islamic faith in many Islamic countries and communities, and how it affects its reality?
I see whatever corruption there may be in Islam, just like I see corruption in all human institutions, which exists wherever human institutions exist. Islam is no different than or Islamic culture is no different than any other human culture. Humans incline toward evil, as the Quran says. The nafsa amara bisu. So that's why we need divine revelation or laws to help people to behave themselves and to be what they are. But Islamic institutions are no more corrupt than Christian institutions or Jewish institutions or political institutions or civil institutions or anything else. If we believe that, then we believe that there's a difference amongst human beings. And as Baha'is, we're forbidden to believe this. Ma'asalama.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your talk again, and thank you for these follow-up discussions. I think it really added to all of our understanding. So thank you a lot.
Thanks once again for asking me to join you. All the very best. And I wish everyone a beautiful holy day. The birth of, it's lovely to see Georg and Yasmin and all the friends here. It's, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Love to Sigrun.
So now I will introduce our speaker for next week. Our speaker next week will be Mr. Edward Price, and his topic will be, who was the Bab and what was his mission? And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern time, so please invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that we will put in the chat. And now we're going to close with a video about the birth of Baha'u'llah.
Praise his name, wondrous name, greatest name, Ya Baha'u'llah. The promised one has come. His name is Baha'u'llah. As Christ came in the station of the sun, Baha'u'llah comes as a glory of God. Justice is his gift to us. He brought us divine unity. He told us about the oneness of mankind, and that all religions agree. Praise his name, wondrous name, greatest name, Ya Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah is his name. The glory of God is his name. The promised one of all ages has come. He has come. The promised one. Praise his name, wondrous name, greatest name, Ya Baha'u'llah. Ya Baha'u'llah. Praise his name, wondrous name, greatest name.
Thank you so much, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Have a good week. Bye.